Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Energy Institute Technical Webinar Series with the topic of focus, the Wind Turbine Safety Rules Support Procedure 5, Temporary Application of an Alternative Safe System of Work. It's great to see so many of you on this call this morning, so thank you for taking the time to join us. So we just move on to the next slide and I'll introduce myself and the speakers. So my name is Emma McGyver and I am Technical Manager at the Energy Institute. Key to that is my role as lead support for SafetyOn, the onshore wind health and safety organisation, which is working to ensure everyone working on onshore wind stays safe and gets home safe at the end of their day. I'm delighted to be joined by Wind Turbine Safety Rules Operational Safety Rules Group members, Charles and Mark. Charles is Head of Control Centre for UK and Ireland for RES, and Mark is Advisor of Electrical Safety and Operations for Equinor. Mark is also Chair of the Wind Turbine Safety Rules Operational Safety Rules Group. So if I take you through the housekeeping, so just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the Energy Institute's YouTube page after the event. All participants are muted except for myself, Mark and Charles. And if you do have any questions, please do have questions, post those into the Q&A function only. Do not post them into the chat as they will not be picked up. So an overview of the agenda for this morning's session. I will soon be passing over to Mark, who will provide an introduction to the Wind Turbine Safety Rules and support procedures and the reporting structure. And following this, Mark will pass over to Charles, and Charles will update on the key changes and the benefits of Support Procedure 5. But before I do pass to Mark, I'd like to give a brief introduction to the Energy Institute. So if we progress to the next slide, please. So the Energy Institute is a chartered professional membership body for people who work across the world of energy, working with and for 20,000 individuals and over 200 companies in 120 countries. Ours is a unique global interdisciplinary community working to create a better energy future. Our purpose is creating a better energy future for our members and society by accelerating a just global energy transition to net zero. And we deliver against that purpose across three broad themes. These include attracting and developing a diverse energy workforce, for example, through our work on professional development and training through our academy and bringing energy professionals together. We convene expertise and evidence to inform energy decision making, for example, by hosting events, the annual International Energy Week and Awards held in February being a great example of this, with its focus on a multi-track transition across the globe. And we also enable industry to make energy safer, more efficient and lower carbon through our technical programme and the delivery of industry technical guidelines which are used globally. We are the independent custodians of technical innovation expertise for the global energy sector, helping to accelerate the energy transition through member collaboration, dialogue with regulators, academia and wider stakeholders. Our work is based on technical evidence and broad consensus, and because of that is accepted as a representing the industry benchmark, both by the industry itself and regulators. We work across the breadth and depth of the energy sector, from oil and gas to renewables, upstream to downstream, and globally, bringing representatives together from across the world to tackle issues that affect everyone. So if we progress to the next slide, yes, that's the one, Amy, thank you. So today the EI is home to a range of collaborative initiatives, including the G+, the Global Offshore Wind Health and Safety Organisation, and SafetyOn, the Onshore Wind Health and Safety Organisation. As you'll know, hundreds of thousands are employed in the wind energy industry, and G+ and SafetyOn, in partnership with the Energy Institute, is working to make sure they go home safe. Both SafetyOn and G+ have four main work areas, which include incident data reporting, good practice guidance, safe by design workshops, and learning from shared incidents. Members of both organisations also set the general direction of the wind turbine safety rules. And to that end, I will now pass over to Mark to introduce the rules and support procedures. So over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Watson, and I'm the advisor for electrical safety and operations for Equinor, and the chair of the Operational Safety Renewables Group, managing the wind turbine safety rules. So as most of you probably know, the wind turbine safety rules are a model set of safety rules, and they formalise a safe system of work to manage significant risk associated with wind turbines, both offshore and onshore. As part of the Operational Safety Renewable Group, or the OSRG, these wind turbine safety rules are developed by wind farm owners and operators, and to achieve general safety and the safety from the system within that rule set. The general direction of the rules is set by SafetyOn, together with members of the G+, Offshore Wind Health and Safety Organisation, and managed by the Energy Institute. I'll show you on the next slide how that's structured. So the OSRG is made up of all Tier 1 members, and the companies on the slide represented in that OSRG group. Some companies have one, some companies have two members in that group if there's an offshore and onshore representation. How it works is we have the Wind Turbine Safety Rules Steering Committee, where ideas from the OSRG come from the industry and is fed into the steering committee to have some approval that we can continue with those areas of work, and then we come back and we deal with those requests, improvements and updates for the wind turbine safety rules in the OSRG. We can also get some feedback from technical advisory committees or any focal groups, all feeding into the steering committee. Once they're the areas where we talk about the updates. So the areas or the support procedures that we have within the safety rules all are up on screen. So there's 8 different support procedures covering general provisions, approved tools, objections under the grounds of safety, LV plant and apparatus, appointment of persons, cross boundaries, approval of electronic safety documents, and as we're going to talk around today, the TAS process, so the application of a temporary and alternative safe system of work, which Charlie will go through the updates in a minute. What the OSRG has been working on recently and some upcoming publications. So in May, piece support procedure 7, which is a cross-boundary document, was updated and republished. As we're going to talk around today, P5, so the TAS process, has been updated and republished in February. And up-and-coming publications and work which is happening as we speak within the OSRG is P6. There's a working group now going through the updates and improvements towards P6, and we're expected that publication to be around Q3 2025. There's also a new procedures called the Wind Turbine System Safety Rules, and this includes HV and LV work on a wind turbine, and this is a new process, and we're expecting this to be published around September of this year, and more information and updates will come around that as and when we get closer to the time. So that is a very quick update to what we're doing in the OSRG and how that feeds into SafetyOn, G+ and the Energy Institute. I'll now hand it over to Charlie to go through the updates that we've put in place for the recent publication for P5. Over to you, Charlie.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. And welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us this morning. My name's Charles McCluckie. I am the head of Control Centre for UK and I for RES. I've been in that role for about 10 years. I'm also the lead authority on the Wind Turbine Safety Rules for the organisation as well, and represent RES on the OSRG as well. So, and I've been sitting on that group for some 7 years now, I think. So quite a long period of time. It's been very interesting. Yep, just to move on. So just a bit on the history of TAS. TAS was first introduced in 2021. It came in as part of the version 4 update of the rules in that year. The reason the version 4 was released was that there was quite substantial updates to the rules at that stage. And arguably TAS was probably the biggest update or the biggest deviation for the previous set of rules. Just touching a little bit more on those changes, the changes that the OSR group work on are primarily driven by feedback from peers and stakeholders. I think Mark touched on that a bit earlier. So we're not a committee that just dreams up changes for ourselves. We are driven by those feedbacks, and those feedbacks can come from many areas, such as surveys, maybe brought directly to the steering group by the various representatives from the different organisations, and yeah, maybe even the other groups within SafetyOn, you know, and as part of sort of aspirational developments and stuff like that. So, such as the potential for globalisation of the rules. So these things may all require updates and what to the rules. So the initial feedbacks that led to the introduction to TAS pre-2021 were that there was a feeling that the SREC process was overly laborious in its application. The need to communicate with so many stakeholders and whatnot was deemed as a real barrier to its use. It was felt that the flow time to communicate with all these organisations, the level of input that and debate that it caused was quite laborious and was really not put people off using that SREC process. The other one at the can we go back one slide, please? Yeah. The other one was a sort of response to the views around the practical application of the SRIC and SREC. The fact that you are making fundamental changes at the very highest level, you are in effect changing the overarching structure of the rules, and the SREC and the work was being completely taken out of the incumbent set of rules, and its management was completely isolated for the incumbent set of rules. So those were the primary two feedbacks pre-2001 that the steering group worked on, and the outcome of that was the TAS process. So TAS, it was fairly simple in its principle, and really the original document only had one section explaining the principles of TAS. So it was fairly basic in its application, but it was effective in getting it introduced to the industry. Now, obviously, that ran for 2 or 3 years and triggered some additional feedbacks specific to the TAS process at that point in time. So those were concerns over the potential for the TAS to be used quite transiently and reactively. And yeah, the other one was, as a consequence, its application like that was concerns over the workload that was causing for the responsible managers for company A, for instance. We had feedback that some of these individuals were facing multiple requests for assets to be tasked out and multiple requirements for signatures over the course of 1 or 2 days. So it was becoming really laborious because it was being used as a fairly transient and reactive process, unfortunately. There was also some concerns over the responsibilities and accountability under tasks, as those weren't really that clearly defined in the first process. So again, there was different people being expected to fulfill different roles at different times, and that was creating quite a bit of nervousness within people who had some core responsibilities under the company's rules. So that triggered the latest iteration and an expansion in the task process itself. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Just touching on the purpose of tasks, as a document, it's intended to provide you with guidance on the new iteration on the process of tasks. You know, what's primarily what it is for, but it's also extending and providing you some guidance on the considerations when using a task, just so that you can be better placed in understanding whether a task process is adequate for the project or the piece of work that you're trying to manage. This is a key one, I think, is to allow all organisations the opportunity to supplement their resourcing at their sites. You know, so if you know, maybe have resource constraints just to allow you to complete basic work such as routine servicing and stuff like that, or if you have campaigns, work improvement campaigns and stuff like that, where you're struggling to resource them, upgrades and stuff like that, then this is primarily what the task process is for. It is to allow you that opportunity. It's an attempt to be reasonably pragmatic about the application of the rules, allow organisations the opportunity to supplement the resourcing through the contracting of additional resources. It really isn't intended to circumvent the rules in any way, shape or form, or the standards that are applied. So I think that's quite an important message, and probably the key message here. It also gives you more guidance, the new iteration gives you more guidance on the application of the tasks, you know, right down to the, as I say, the considerations, what you might want to consider as part of your project planning, and you know, right down to the completion of the task form and the different sections that need to be filled out, and who fills those out and what information is required and whatnot. So it goes into more detail in providing guidance on that practical completion of the task form, for instance. Overall as well, what we're trying to do here is bring tasks in and align it with your the planning, the project planning that you would do anyway if you had any kind of campaign of works in place, you know. So making sure that the task isn't an afterthought, an end thought right at the end, and is rushed and applied right at the end. We're trying to provide some guidance within the task about the considerations, as we say, so that it starts to align with the project planning that you would undoubtedly do if you had a campaign of works on. And the other one is describing roles and responsibilities in a bit more detail, you know, just giving more guidance on what those core roles are, who can fulfill them, so that there is no ambiguity and you are absolutely clear that, you know, it isn't just, as I said before, a transient process that can be initiated by anyone. So it tries to frame those rules a bit. So the roles are broadly described at the start of the document in the definitions, but it also talks about them throughout the guidance on filling out the task form as well, so that you can see the role and the information that those and the responsibilities that those core roles provide. I'd say the two key roles that come into play here are the responsible manager. Ultimately, they are the individual who will be responsible for the administration of tasks. They're generally going to be a representative from company A as well, you know, those that own and control the incumbent set of rules that are in place on any given site. excuse me. And probably the second most prominent role here as well will be the person responsible for the work. So that can be a member of Company A, or it can be a representative of another organisation who have aspirations to get this work done, such as owner-operators and whatnot. But they are ultimately, if you want to frame it as like the project engineer, the person who's responsible for organising the campaign of works. So, as I say, it goes to some lengths to try and better identify those roles and those responsibilities, and hopefully that makes people more comfortable about that any sort of perceived liabilities and whatnot that may come with your involvement in this process. Can we move on, please? I would say the key changes here, as I was saying before, additional guidance and for the requirements and considerations before using a task. This is really, as I was saying before, to try and align the tasks, bring it in and to supplement your planning process a bit. So it does provide you sort of 8 key points of consideration for whether a task is appropriate and suitable for your particular application. So that, and one of the probably a key point here is that it fundamentally states that the preference would be to replace one set of wind turbine safety rules with another set of wind turbine safety rules. That would be the first consideration and the best solution in most cases. So it gives you some considerations where, for instance, where it is another set of wind turbine safety rules, but it also gives you some things to consider when it may be something else as well, and a different set of rules, maybe a traditional generation type set of rules. It does encourage you to consider some of the other general provisions that may come as almost like a byproduct to having a set of wind turbine safety rules in place. So your general engagement with operational controllers, for instance, in the release of plant, those types of things should be considered. Any provisions for accessing the turbine and stuff like that should be considered as well. And as just some examples, and potentially the emergency response arrangements that may, as I say, become almost inherently as when you have the company's set of rules in place and the operational controller function in place, just making sure that these are all sustained and still in place. Point 2, guidance added to the intended use of the tasks. This is just sort of broadening what was probably included in the first set of the rules. So again, this is just the sort of principal application of the rules, just the principal guidance. It does talk about how under task now the incumbent SRIC remains in place. The incumbent company set of rules are still overarching, and actually task is administered almost as a function of company A's rules. Ultimately, the work that is done on your campaign will be done under the other set of wind turbine safety rules, but the point of getting to that point and the administration of that is still done as a function of company A's rules. So it's just making that clear. The feeling is that keeps everything sort of coordinated and cohesive, rather than what you maybe had with the SRIC and SREC, where it felt as though it was a bit of sort of brutal diversion from the rules altogether, So it was very much like a completely independent process. This sort of keeps the rationale in place that everything's sort of managed under company's rule set in the first instance. And the third section is guidance on the completion of the task document itself, which was sort of missing, I think, from the original task process. This is literally a sort of 8-point, I think it's a six or 8-point guidance that goes through the different sections of the task document and describes the information that should be included in there, who may be responsible for providing that information, and just potentially guiding you to who you should be communicating with at the different stages and whatnot. So it's just providing that bit more in-depth guidance on the completion of the tasks, which also helps supplement those questions about roles and responsibilities as well. So it potentially helps clear those up as well a bit. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? This is just a bit of a summary statement, you know, that just to try and encompass what the new rule set is about, what task is about, and what we were trying to satisfy with this last update. So again, principally broadening the opportunity for organisations to supplement resources and to meet their obligations or aspirations for campaign work and stuff like that as well, and just to be as pragmatic about the application of the rules as we can. We know that ultimately, you know, we may move from one set of rules to another. The way we're managing the piece of work is it may be changing. Who's doing the piece of work is changing, but ultimately legislation and whatnot behind that never changes. So the obligations always remain the same. So it's just trying to encourage people to maintain those standards and make sure this isn't used to circumvent the rules in any way. The core purpose is to give people the opportunity to supplement their resourcing, as I say. And yeah, and as I say, they are just trying to prevent it being used in such a transient manner, in a reactive manner. And yeah, speaking out of school, just that feeling that it potentially was being used to circumvent the complexity and the complication of applying a set of wind turbine safety rules. And the other point was, and this come through quite strongly, was protecting those that have roles and responsibilities under the rules, you know, so they don't feel that they're unduly exposed to responsibilities and liabilities that may have been considered unreasonable, you know, and just making sure that where there are responsibilities and liabilities to be taken, we're absolutely clear about who takes those responsibilities and liabilities as well. So it's just to support those people so that they can have the confidence in administering the task process. So I think that's everything from me. Can move on now, guys. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay, now we're over to the questions. As we said earlier on, there's a Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. You can click on that and add your question into that Q&A section, not into the chat. If you put it into the chat, then we won't read it out. But if you can put it into the Q&A, then we'll try and go through some questions. So please put them in. We have one already, which I'll start with. It's probably quite complex, Charlie, so I'll read it out. Can you please clarify that it is possible that independent turbine inspections can be carried out by application of a TAS and alternative safe system of work for the third-party company to perform these as organised by wind farm owners? There has been pushback from an O&M on accepting this and maintaining they must be supervised. They must supervise the works under the Wind Turbine Safety Rules.
Yeah, I would say that that's probably a good example. You know, the opportunities here are for everyone. You know, it's intended to meet the aspirations and the challenges of O&Ms, ISPs, owner operators as well. So yeah, as long as the task process is diligently followed and there is good demonstration of planning and assessment of the third party organisation, And I personally don't see why that shouldn't happen. So, and fundamentally, that is what TAS is intended for.
I think that leads quite well onto the understanding of, and there's a question around who really has the full responsibility to agree that a TAS process can be applied.
I would say ultimately the person who's responsible for the work is the one that is responsible for ensuring what is being implemented is suitable, sufficient, and adequate for the works and compliant with legislation and whatnot as well. So, yeah, the responsible person who would ultimately be from company A would have. I use the word responsibility lightly, but would be responsible for administrating the TAS documentation. There would always, as ever, be an opportunity to raise concerns, any potential concerns and issues, you know, as long as they are fair and reasonable, then they should always be listened to. I would say that the responsible person should have the ability to influence to an extent within reasonable levels what is actually happening. But yeah, I would say that ultimately it's the person responsible for the work who holds the responsibility for making sure that the arrangements are adequate and sufficient.
Good. Next question. If I understand correctly, Charles talked about use of TAS as intended to help address resource constraints, e.g. for maintenance campaigns and the preference for the replacement rule set being under a set wind turbine safety rules. My experience of TAS use so far is in cases of major component works completed under CDM and for very specific limited works such as visual inspections, i.e. with an alternative non-wind turbine safety rules safe system of work in place in both cases. Are these also cases that were envisaged and seen as suitable? So did we consider this when we updated the TAS process?
So I think the guidance does go into both scenarios, you know, where it is the considerations where it is a set of wind turbine safety rules and where it is an alternative set of safety rules. I think the situations like these major campaigns under CDM and whatnot, this can cause some complications sometimes. I think, you know, if you're operating under CDM, the likelihood is that you're still going to need a safe system work. That could still be your wind turbine safety rules. It could still be company A's safety rules. It's all down to the planning here, you know. So you would the TAS process would encourage you under all circumstances to try and use a set of wind turbine safety rules to manage the work, regardless what the scenario is. But if for some reason that isn't possible, it is reasonable. It would be reasonable to use some other form of safety rules. So I think, yes, in short, it does envisage these different scenarios and tries to broaden the guidance so that these can ultimately be accounted for. These different scenarios can be accounted for.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there's a question that's probably quite similar in the first one. Is the interpretation that the TAS form is only to be used if the company whose alternative safe system of work will be in place is being directly contracted by the company who normally manages the wind turbine safety rules on the site? Correct. We have found resistance from some O&Ms when trying to implement usage of the TAS when the contract has been directly contracted by the owner. So again, this is about this is a link to my question a little bit. This is about understanding of who can agree that the TAS should be applied, shouldn't it?
Yes, yeah. And I think it's, as I say, the opportunities are supposed to be extended to all people who have a vested interest here, you know, owner operators who own the plant and ultimately have obligations to get work done, may want to improve the performance of their assets and whatnot, and some of that work may fall outside what was originally contracted under O&M contracts. So we would certainly feel that it's reasonable for those that own the assets to be able to initiate some type of work, you know, and you would hope that there would be reasonable engagement by all parties. So yeah, as just reiterating that point, it's intended to open those opportunities for anybody who may have a vested interest in that.
When there is a conflict between the view of the OEM client, AE, and the contractor, AE, over the task process proposed, is there an abbreviation process for this to ensure safety from the system is maintained whilst allowing work to proceed? Tricky question.
Yeah.
I think we can answer this. You know, the task process is designed for the wind turbine safety rules operator of that site to manage that. And if they want an alternative safe system of work, then there has to be agreement and everybody has to sign the process. Without it, then yeah, you can't just proceed regardless. I think the task process is there to make sure your wind turbine safety rules you're applying on the site, if you need to task it out to something different, then it needs to be reviewed, agreed to be equal or better than what's currently being managed, and that work can happen. So if people involved in the process can't agree to that, then you're going to have to look at some other way to do it, I think.
Yeah, and I would say the task process or the rules don't give you that arbitrationary service to help support that. There would be other mechanisms, whether using the C word or something like contracts or something like that. You know, it would come down to that. So that would then become a bit of a dispute between the two parties. But unfortunately, no, the group could not support that decision.
I linked us on to one from Martin. The request by company A to review a third party safe system of work, whether is there wind turbine safety rules or an alternative safe system of work. Is this a requirement or preference to ensure that the safe system of work is suitable for the task? I think it is at the discretion of company A to permit the task.
Again, the individual who we're trying to be clear about the responsibilities, you know, so company will be the responsible person will be an individual from company A whose rules there, but their key responsibility at that point is to administer the task under their rule set. This person responsible for the work is the one who ultimately has the responsibility for ensuring the what is implemented is suitable and sufficient, you know, for the purpose. So you would hope it wouldn't primarily be the responsible managers, particularly where you're in different organisations. It wouldn't be their core responsibility to make that judgment. It would still remain with the person responsible for the work. But you would hope that there would be reasonable avenues for feedback and negotiation and stuff like that, you know. This is just an enabler to give everybody the opportunity to make these things work, you know. So, but ultimately, it will all come down to reasonable planning, communication, and working together on that. But no, it's not the responsible manager, particularly when it's separate parties, who has the final say on that. You know, it's ultimately the person responsible for the work who's responsible for the adequacy of the provisions, I would say.
Good. Next question. Could transfer tasks be considered for emergency situations? The reason for this is that there may be additional isolations required in the event of an emergency that would be outside of the current AWP that is active. You may need to react quickly, and a task might allow this flexibility. Emergency response. I know you touched on it earlier on, Charlie, around understanding people's responsibilities while on site, and I think that's possibly something that could quite easily be overlooked in this emergency situation. Who has the responsibility to deal with this? It's something that you would have to consider, I think. when you agree the alternative safe system of work that would be used on site at that time? How would they deal with that at that time while under the TAS? Or is it agreed in an emergency situation the control room can just do the safety operations and that while everybody escapes? I think something would have to be agreed in that scenario, and I think that's something that people need to consider. It's easy just to say, well, we're not got the competence under our safety rules, so that we're going to hand it over to a specialist contractor and they use their safety rules to do the task, and everyone can be very focused on the task. There's possibly a little bit more to it than that. So emergency response is obviously a big one to consider. Yeah. But whether we have a transfer section in the TAS, I would question whether there's a need for that, because it's out for the date and time duration. I know you might want to transfer it back quickly, but realistically, is that going to happen in an emergency situation? I don't know. But yeah, emergency response is something that should be considered.
I agree. Yeah.
As Martin, as a follow-up, I would be interested to hear from anyone in the group who has successfully convinced a client of safe use of a blade maintenance platform in the UK under a TAS. Okay, well, we will have to, if anybody has experienced that, then please get in contact with Martin or through some other processes. But we can, the TAS, I will assume, has been used for blade maintenance in some scenarios. It's one of those specific tasks, one-off tasks, where like the O&M provider wouldn't have the competence. So it kind of works quite well that the task could be used, and especially if it's short duration one-off task for a repair over a couple of days. And then offshore and onshore are two totally different complexities for that work as well. So that is where a task can be used. I'm sure it's being used well a number of different places. So if anybody's got some information about that, then
and particularly where the contracted company may have their own set of wind turbine safety rules.
And people with the correct competence to take over the isolations as well. If Company A operate in the wind turbine safety rules and is requested by a customer to TAS a wind farm for work organised by them, which will be carried out by a third party, Company A requests and reviews and assesses the third party safe system of work, maybe their wind turbine safety rules or not. If the third party refuses, it's the discretion of Company A to permit the TAS, to permit the TAS. Well, at the point that, go on, Charlie.
I think that's a bit like the other questions. It's ultimately down to the person responsible for the work to present something that is suitable and sufficient for the campaign of works, and Company A's responsible manager doesn't hold the key obligation responsibility for that assessment. But again, if there was a blinded omissions or concerns, we would hope that there would be avenues for reasonable discussion and feedback on that, as in any circumstance. But in the first instance, it would be ultimately down to the person responsible for the work to ensure the adequacy. I think that's ultimately where it always comes back to, so. And when that individual holds that responsibility, you would hope that, and then that's clear, that that would encourage a proper level assessment and the presentation of something adequate and effective. By us including these additional considerations and whatnot in the industry standard set of rules, we're hoping that provides that influence that this is used less reactively, and it is sort of used in supplement a good quality planning process for these campaigns. So the industry standard set of rules are laying some sort of guidance out for you there that it would be very wise to follow, you know. So yeah, I think that's where we're trying to head off that tendency where things were maybe being brought to the table that could be deemed as being insufficient. So
any more questions? I don't think we've got any more questions in there. I'll just ask one, Charlie, and this is around, we had a discussion when we updated this document around work on more than one wind turbine under a TAS. Can you just explain how we feel that should be managed now under the new document?
I think again this comes down to planning and the practicalities of the application. I think there's I don't think this is actually mentioned in here, but I think there was a sort of suggestion it would be best that if you could apply an individual task to each turbine and lay out that duration. Again, another consideration may be that you want to consider if TAS is suitable if the project is going to extend beyond 2 or 3 days and you want that machine to be back in operation again, you know. So things like the practicalities of, well, what happens if there's a fault occurs, or you, because in effect you're tasked out. What we don't want is, you know, the turbines being tasked in and out and in and out constantly. So again, it's probably down to the nature of the work, the durations, but it may be best that you try wherever possible to task one turbine at a time, you know. So, which I understand that it creates a bit more administration work, but that should probably be considered in the overall assessment of the suitability of the rules, I would say. So.
Okay. One question. I take it there is no limit on the number of turbines which can be placed under TAS. One of our O&M strictly limits it to 2, despite the this is basically just a question which we've just got answered, I think.
Yeah, I think if the number of turbines starts to grow, it potentially could become a bit complicated, and communication, you know, the risk of miscommunications and whatnot would grow. It's to do with the complexities and the suitabilities, isn't it? So it's, again, something to consider when you're reviewing tasks as an option for management.
And it's all about understanding the risk of the task, isn't it? Understanding the risk of the job that is being tasked out, you know, and the offshore risk compared to the onshore risk could be quite different. Maybe offshore is controlled a little bit more due to vessels, or, you know, onshore it might be controlled a little bit more because people can just go, you know, access one to the other and to get the job done. So it makes it easier. But I think that's all part of the planning, understanding the task and agreeing on what is the safest way to manage it. I think Company A always has the responsibility to maintain the safe system of work and safety on the asset, even when it's tasked out to another company. They still have some responsibilities. So that's very important to understand that. So the risk and how it's managed is up to them to understand. Any more questions before we finish? No. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I'm going to say thank you very much for those who put questions in. Thank you, Charlie, for giving us an update on the P5 updates and the TAS. And thank you very much for everybody joining and listening to the webinar. Speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.